And our next speaker is Yukie Nagai. She is a professor at the University of Tokyo. Her research encompasses cognitive developmental robotics, computational neuroscience, and assistive technologies for developmental disorders. She employs computational methods to investigate the underlying neural mechanisms involved in social cognitive development. In acknowledgement of her work, she received the title of World's 50 Most Renowned Women in Robotics in 2020 and 35 Women in Robotics and Engineering and Science in 2022, among many other recognitions. Please help me welcome Yukie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So my talk is about cognitive developmental robotics, which was advocated almost 25 years ago. In this research area, the robotics researchers have been developing the learning model which can better understand the human intelligence. Now, I'd like to introduce the new theory, which is inspired in neuroscience studies, which is called Embodied Predictive Processing. The human cognitive development is a very complex phenomenon. They start with exploring their body because they don't know yet how their body looks like and how they can control their body. And once they acquire the abilities to control their body in an intentional manner, they start work on an environment and also learn to communicate with others. Here, the research question is, what is the unified mechanism which can explain this dynamic phenomenon of the cognitive development? We know from developmental psychology study that the human cognitive development is in a continuous processes. They start sensory motor experiences, which lead to the development of the social cognitive abilities. Here, additional important aspect of cognitive development is the diversity. We know that some children show the typical trajectory of the development, whereas some remaining children show atypical development, including the developmental disorders. And our research target is to explain the unified mechanism which can explain the underlying neural principle, which can account for not only the continuity in the development, but also the diversity in the development. I think this point is a little bit different from the typical AI studies. The AI studies often explore the optimal solutions to achieve the cognitive behaviors. Here, we want to emphasize the importance of the diversity, which allows us to create more like a sustainable society and also the creative societies. And then in the last decades, we have been focusing on the theory called predictive processing. The neuroscientists have been suggesting that the human brain works as a predictive machine, which means that the brain does not simply rely on the incoming sensory signal, but our brain, like an internal model, makes a prediction about the world. And then when they perceive the world and act on the environment, the brain tries to minimize the prediction error, which is a unified principle of the human brain. And importantly, the neuroscientists also have been suggesting that the human brain can adaptively switch how strongly it brains relies on the incoming sensory signal or top-down prediction, especially depending on the precision of its signal. Let me give you one example to demonstrate how your brain also works as a predictive machine. This is a very famous optical illusion. Maybe many of you know the fact here. But I think that many would think that if you compare the color of the region A, region B, many of you think that the region B looks brighter. But this is not the fact in a physical level. At the physical level, these two regions have exactly the same color, exactly the same luminance. The reason why many of you think that the region B looks brighter is that your brain utilizes predictions from your past experiences, the context information. This is why your brain perceives the world with a biased manner. Now we extend this idea to an embodied predictive processing. Of course, everyone here agrees at the importance of the embodiment. Here, we have 3 points by extending the idea of predictive processing with the embodiment. The first one, is that the children and also the robot can act on the environment. And through the sensory motor experiences, their precision of their prediction and the sensory signal get improved. This is the idea of their explaining the development and the diversity in the cognitions. And the second importance here is that multimodal integration. The human brain receives not only the exteroceptive signal like the vision and the audition, but also the proprioception, which is about the body state, and interoception, which is an internal state of our body. We now extending our predictive coding mechanism to integrate such multimodal signals. And the third important point is the social alignment. Not only the single brain, but also the multiple brains together can minimize the prediction error. I'd like to give you one example to demonstrate how this embodied predictive processing can explain the developmental change and also the diversity in the cognition. We started with the human child experiment to test what kind of internal model the children have and also whether they have the motivation to minimize the prediction error. Here the task is that on the tablet, the children can see only a part of the figure, and then they are asked to draw whatever they want. There is no like a clear instruction or like an optimal behaviors. As you can see there, many small children do the scribbling behavior. They cannot get the idea what this task is. We also observe very creative behaviors. For example, in the next part, you will see that there's some features are scrambled on the touch display. And then they sometimes struggle what they should draw. And then this boy is actually very, very creative. This is a scrambled feature of the face. And in the next part, he will see the scrambled features of the house. But we found that he's very, very creative. He made 2 stories of the house, and even he added the door on the first floor or the ground floor. This really illustrates that this boy has an internal model of their like an apartment, 2 stories apartment. This is why he could add the missing parts to complete their apartment-like figure. So we found that this is a very nice task to investigate the developmental improvement and also the individual diversity. So we analyzed the data from more than 100 of children and then tried to find the developmental change and also the diversity. Here is the result. For example, that on the the bottom left, you can see many scribbling behaviors, mainly from the young children. And from older children, we could observe the completion behaviors. But interestingly, we also find the individual diversity. For example, this chart stick to the existing line, just trace the existing line, and he or she did not add the missing parts. Whereas another chart often did draw the kinematic, the pictures, like a triangle or square, something like that, while ignoring the visible features. So our question is whether we can explain this developmental change and also the individual diversity based on the embodied predictive processing. This is now an experiment using our robot, and we implemented the neural network model inspired by the embodied predictive processing theory. And then we modified some parameters in the internal model to show their developmental improvement and also the individual diversity. Here you can see 2 examples. On the left side, the robot was very successful in completing the missing parts. On the right side, you can see that the robot is doing the scribbling patterns, which is also often observed in young children. Here is a neural network model we utilized. This is a relatively simple neural network model, recurrent type neural network model. We introduced the Bayesian inference module, which can integrate the top-down prediction and the bottom-up sensory signal, depending on the precision of these signals. Our hypothesis was that by modifying the precision of the sensory signal and the prediction, we can simulate the developmental change as well as their individual differences. Here is the result. You can see that just by modifying 2 parameters, we could nicely reproduce the very diverse drawing behaviors. When we first watched their children's drawing, it first looked like very, very complicated. It was very difficult to understand what's the underlying mechanism. But by developing the neural network model, we could nicely simulate that their embodied predictive processing, just in a unified, simple their architectures, can generate such diverse behaviors. So from these studies, we also emphasize that the predictive processing gives a nice hint for us to understand and better understand the human intelligence. And then this is the end of my talk. In my lab, we do not only like a drawing experiment, but also like an emotion interactions and also the social interactions to understand to what extent that diverse cognitive behaviors in children can be explained by our neural network model and also the robot experiments. And this understanding actually help us or allow us to design the assistive technologies for developmental disorders, which is very important for an application of our robotics technologies. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and I hope that my talk could stimulate the following discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. We can take a couple questions while we switch out to the next speaker. I see a hand waving there in the middle. Yeah.
Sorry. So I'm curious, you talk mostly about prediction. Sorry, I'm standing here.
Where?
You talked mostly about prediction,
over there.
Yes.
which is in the end about most of the time about a monomodal distribution and about reproducing the environment. For kids, Bayesian surprise, at least as far as I understood the whole Bayesian brain theories, seem to be the key thing. How would you do experiments about Bayesian surprise in this context?
Thank you. The Bayesian surprise is a great motivation for children to learn something new. The surprise means that there is a prediction error there. And then the motivation for children is to minimize the prediction error. And actually, there is a study, it's called intrinsic motivation, which can utilize such a surprise or prediction error as a trigger for robots as well as the children to start learning the new tasks. So I think the Bayesian, the surprise can be also nicely integrated, the idea of predictive processing. Thank you.
And there was a question over here someplace.
Thanks for the nice talk. What's the difference between the standard predictive processing versus embodied predictive processing? Is there any difference at the principle level or model or theoretical level? Or you mean simply applying predictive processing to embodied interaction means something? Yeah, what's the difference?
Thank you. The principle of the predictive processing is the same, but then we want to integrate the multimodal signals, integrating the proprioceptive signal, exteroception, and the interoception together. With this, the integration of the interoception, we can think about the emotions and also their feelings of their developmental processes. And still that we are working on the processes, and then we don't know yet what we can go beyond the original, the traditional predictive processing theory. But then I think that embodied predictive processing has a potential to also integrate that social interactions into the predictive processing, their ideas.
Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for a great talk.
Thank you.